afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you're listening or watching from in the world, of course. Welcome back to the You Turned Up Show right here on GBKM FM. Of course, I'm your host, Romain Redmond, and if you're just joining us or for the first time on the You Turned Up Show, of course, welcome to the show. If you're back from last show, of course, welcome back. As you know, the You Turned Up Show go from 3 until 4 p.m. right here on GBKM FM. And don't forget, this is where we aim to inspire, inform, and also to energize today's youth so that they can tackle the world and help to create a world that they would like and love to, of course, live in. Don't forget our platforms are on Facebook at GBKM TV, on YouTube at GBKM TV. Also get us on our website, www.gbkm.fm. You can also get us on TuneIn app, is GBKM, and get our app from our website and take us with you wherever you go in the world. And of course, the Return Up Show is brought to you by the kind sponsorship of course, AOF Immigration Canada, who specializes in all your immigration needs, ranging from the Quebec Investor Program, permanent residency, student visa, whatever it is, they have you covered. So of course, just give them a call or send them an email for your private and your confidential consultation. Their phone number is 416-629-4617. You can also send them an email, it's info@aofimmigration.com. You can also visit our offices. They're located at 5800 Ambler Drive in the great city of Mississauga. So if you were with us on last week's broadcast, you would have heard the interesting discussion that we have, informative, and of course really paving a way as to how we can dig ourselves out of the hole that has kept us bounded through racism. But of course, today we continue on that same trajectory, but we're bringing you those policies, we're bringing you those solutions to the already established problem. And you definitely don't want to miss that discussion we'll have in studios. Of course, I'll be joined by an amazing panelists who will help me to break down those answers and create those policies for you. And I promise you, you don't want to miss that. But we'll take our very first break right here on the You Turned Up Show, but we'll be right back with so much more.
As the world fights this coronavirus, we are standing together as a family.
My name is Kevin. I'm a fan of GBKM.
My name is Pastor Clement Omozane.
I'm Medea, your red carpet host.
I am your host, Ellen Roxon, for the show Talk That Talk here on GBKM FM.
I'm a mother and a teacher. I stand with everyone at this time.
And my name is OJ Ebobo, co-host of the King's Domain.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Gawoidi, the host of the Chat Up Show on GBKM.
My name is Kenny Bazwai, President and CEO, GBKM FM and TV. We stand with all the community affected by this pandemic.
As the world.
And of course, welcome back to the You Turned Up Show right here on GBKM FM. It's me, your host, Romain Redmond, and as I promised before I went on break, that means you haven't missed anything as much as yet. So we promised to bring you that discussion about real solutions to the issue of anti-Black racism in our society. We want to create a world in which all our young people coming behind us, in front of us, where they can live in an equitable society which recognizes their humanity and treats each and every one fairly and justly. And of course, on my panel today is, of course, a Member of Parliament for Kitchener, Member of Provincial Parliament, that is, for Kitchener Centre, and a critic for anti-racism, for the official opposition, and of course, chair for the NDP's Black Caucus, Dr. Laura May Lindo. Also to join us in the hour, we're hoping is MPP for Scarborough Guildwood, Miss Mitzi Hunter. But of course, Miss Lindo, you're here with us first. Of course, welcome to the You Turned Up Show. We must say, we're having an interesting conversation before we went live. But of course, just to create some foreground, how are you doing personally, though, in light of what's happening outside?
To tell you, it has been a trying time. I'm exhausted, and it is very, very difficult to be having these kinds of conversations, knowing that we have been fighting the same fight against anti-Black racism for so long. But honored to be here to be able to do some of the moving from inside the system.
Absolutely. But the reason for us being here today is one which is disheartening. For one, it's one which is long overdue in the sense that we we didn't expect, many of our forefathers didn't expect that in 2020, moving into 2021, we'll still have to be here grappling and having those conversations about racism, if it's right, if it exists, and all that stuff. But we're in the midst of it. We were just a couple weeks ago given that urgent push, I should say, to have our systems change, to have society change. And of course, I'm talking about everything being catapulted with the murder of George Floyd in the US, which has started a ripple reaction across the world. And here in Canada, that conversation is even stronger than ever in terms of, and the sense of urgency to get it fixed. But of course, Ms. Lindo, being the critic for anti-racism and of course cheer for the Black Caucus, I want you to shed some light on what the establishment of the Black Caucus means in terms of policies, in terms of really getting the system fixed, and then give us some insights into the optimism that we've received from this new urgent push. What does that sense of optimism looks like for the future?
So starting with the Black Caucus, I can tell you that it was with great humility that we were formed. We had hosted a roundtable with leaders in the Black community with the NDP, with Andrea Horwath, our leader. And we were asking about ways that we could operate as the NDP, as the official opposition, to better support Black communities. And one of the calls was to form a Black Caucus. So it's the first time in the history of Ontario that enough Black members of provincial parliament have been elected in a single party, which on its own is quite exciting to think about. And our goal has been to shed light on how every policy, every bit of legislation, every sector in government impacts Black communities. Sometimes we think that there's only a handful of areas that we are impacted, but we know on the ground that Black community members have a different experience, for instance, with affordable housing, a different experience with employment equity, a different experience when we're in education and in healthcare. And so our purpose in forming as the Black Caucus has been to speak openly and honestly about that at question period at Queen's Park and on the streets. So a lot of us have actually been speaking out during the solidarity rallies that have been happening across the province as well. In terms of what's happening, it's interesting when I think about the ripple effect that you were discussing with the murder of George Floyd. One of the things that we're seeing is that people are very clear that change for Black communities has to happen in every sector, that it's not just about policing, but it's also about how Black children are treated in education. It's about how frontline healthcare workers have been underpaid for so long. Many of the Black or the PSWs that we speak about as heroes in long-term care and in our hospital system are Black workers that have been underpaid. And so the fight is quite broad, and again, we are so very humbled to be doing this work.
Absolutely. And interesting enough, let us create some foreground before I proceed to my next question. So just by an indication of yes or no, I want you to answer two questions. We're creating the foreground for our conversation in terms of creating policies. So first question, systematic racism exists in Ontario and Canada at large, yes or no?
Yes.
Systematic racism can be countered with strong and just policies.
Yes.
Absolutely. So let's dive into those policy options that we're here to talk about today. And I'm going to start off with an area you're all too familiar with, education.
Yes.
Education. Your doctorate is in education, of course, and hence, Dr. Lindo, I must give you kudos to that. But before we went on, we're talking about the fact that a number of studies, a number of committees have been put together to explore ways to help eradicate anti-racism, anti-Black racism, Islamophobia, and all this stuff from our schools so as to create that environment for our students to reach full matriculation. But as you said, there are some hindrances to implement these. Why do you think that has been the case? And how do we ensure that these measures are implemented? Because as I said, urgency, it needs to happen this year into next year.
Yes, I totally agree with the urgency, and I totally agree with the reality, which is that in 2020, we have Black students who are still being called the N-word at school. And it is not just in a single school board, but it is across school boards in this province. We often think that in Canada this doesn't happen, but I'm hearing from kids that this happens to them every day. And we have a long history, when I put my research hat on, we have a long history of reports, academic reports and studies in schools across the province that have provided curriculum guidelines, who have insisted that we have to talk about Black history throughout all of our schools, in all of our history classes. There's been a reluctance, in my opinion, on the part of the Ministry of Education to ensure that that's so. What I can tell you from my own experience with my master's and PhD in education and having taught in teacher education, the curriculum documents haven't been changed to ensure that Black history is in fact taught and required. And if you don't require that, then there is nothing that ensures that
I think we just had so sorry about that, Dr. Lindor. I'm just going to put a pause on you there for a bit. Thank you so much. But we'll take a second break here on the Return to the Show. We'll be right back with so much more after this messages. Don't go anywhere, folks. We'll be right back.
As the world fights this coronavirus, we are standing together as a family.
My name is Kevin. I'm a fan of GBKM.
My name is Pastor Clement Omozane.
I'm Medea, your red carpet host.
I am your host, Ellen Roxon, for the show Talk That Talk here on GBKM FM.
I'm a mother and a teacher. I stand with everyone at this time.
Hi, my name is OJ Ebobo, co-host of the King's Domain.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Gawaiti, the host of the Chat Up Show on GBKM.
My name is Kenny Bazwai, President and CEO, GBKM FM and TV. We stand with all the community affected by this pandemic.
As the world fights this coronavirus, we are standing together as a family.
My name is Kevin. I'm a fan of GBKM.
My name is Pastor Clement Omozane.
I'm Medea, your red carpet host.
I am your host, Ellen Roxon, for the show Talk That Talk here on GBKM FM.
I'm a mother and a teacher. I stand with everyone at this time.
Hi, my name is OJ Ebobo, co-host of the King's Domain.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Gawaiti, the host of the Chat Up Show on GBKM.
My name is Kenny Bazwai, President and CEO, GBKM FM and TV. We stand with all the community affected by this pandemic.
As the world fights this coronavirus, we are standing together as a family.
My name is Kevin. I'm a fan of GBKM.
My name is Pastor Clement Omozane.
I'm Medea, your red carpet host.
I am your host, Ellen Roxon, for the show Talk That Talk here on GBKM FM.
I'm a mother and a teacher. I stand with everyone at this time.
Hi, my name is OJ Ebobo, co-host of the King's Domain.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Gawaiti, the host of the Chat Up Show on GBKM.
My name is Kenny Bazwai, President and CEO, GBKM FM and TV. We stand with all the community affected by this pandemic.
As the world fights this coronavirus, we are standing together as a family.
My name is Kevin. I'm a fan of GBKM.
My name is Pastor Clement Omozane.
I'm Medea, your red carpet host.
I am your host, Ellen Roxon, for the show Talk That Talk here on GBKM FM.
I'm a mother and a teacher. I stand with everyone at this time.
Hi, my name is OJ Ebobo, co-host of the King's Domain.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Gawaiti, the host of the Chat Up Show on GBKM.
My name is Kenny Bazwai, President and CEO, GBKM FM and TV. We stand with all the community affected by this pandemic.
As the world fights this coronavirus, we are standing together as a family.
My name is Kevin. I'm a fan of GBKF.
My name is Pastor Clement Omozane.
And of course, welcome back to the U-Turn Show right here on GBKM FM. Of course, we have been having a wonderful discussion, quite insightful. And of course, our panel has been expanded. So just before we went, we had Dr. Laura May Lindo, chair for the Black Caucus for the NDP here, and also critic for the official opposition on anti-racism. And of course, right now we're being joined by member of provincial parliament, that is for Scarborough-Guildwood, of course, MPP Mitzi Hunter. Ms. Hunter, thank you so much for joining us.
It's my pleasure to join you for this important conversation, so thanks for having me on.
It's our pleasure, and one that is quite urgent for us to have in terms of really hammering out a way forward. I mean, we're in a time right now where people of the world are demanding to have the issue of systematic racism resolved. Dr. Lindo, before we went on the break, we're talking about creating that education system which implements the policies which have been recommended so far. And I'm just going to have you continue your discussion there.
After researchers have spoken about is the need to address curriculum. Students actually have spoken a lot about the need to ensure that Black history is discussed throughout all of their classes, and they often talk about not seeing themselves reflected in curriculum, and there's ways that we can ensure that the required, the mandatory curriculum that teachers are using centers those voices as well. There's also been a very, very big call to ensure that all teachers get culturally responsive pedagogy. So this training that helps them to develop the skills and hold them accountable to those skills to address racism in the classroom, no matter what the grade or what they're teaching. Those are all things that we'd be able to do right away. But I think what needs to happen before that will actually come to pass, given the same story and it's 2020, is that we need to see legislative changes where addressing racism is centered in what is required in our Education Act.
Absolutely. And Ms. Hunter, you have had that portfolio before as Education Minister. And what we're just saying is that a lot of the recommendations have been on the table for a number of years now, but school boards seem to be reluctant, for lack of a better word, to implement those policies. What has that been like? Why is it taking so long to have these measures implemented in our schools?
I mean, that's a complex question, right? Because we know that systemic racism exists and anti-Black racism exists, and this affects our education system in a number of ways. If you look at the success rate of graduates from our public education system, it's actually quite high. It's over 87% at this point, which is excellent. So most students who go into our schools get that education and they graduate with a very well-recognized, internationally recognized diploma. However, if you look into the numbers where they exist, like with the Toronto District School Board that has been collecting disaggregated data for almost a decade now, you will see that certain segments of young people, Black males, for instance, youth who live in the care of children's aid societies or foster care, youth with disabilities, LGBTQ plus youth, are not graduating at the same rate, and this is unacceptable. And so when I was Minister of Education, we put in place an equity in education strategy to address those gaps, and also a secretariat that would oversee the implementation across school boards in Ontario. And so there has been some progress made. If you look at more school boards are now voluntarily implementing the collection of data that's based on race and other socioeconomic indicators. And that information is going to give them the tools that they need to make sure that all students can and will succeed. But the pace of change, which is what you're
Ms. Hunter, before you continue in that point, what are those exact tools that they need? Because I think a lot of us don't fully understand what we're talking about in terms of fixing. What are the actual things that need to be done?
Yeah, so, I mean, what I was suggesting is that this has to happen on a board-by-board level, because that's where decisions are made. We spend a lot of resources in Ontario on our education system, and we want to make sure that every student, every young person has access to that type of information that they need to succeed and to achieve. So some of the changes that were made as a result of the education equity strategy was even just doing training on inclusion, anti-Black racism training, that type of training happening at the school board level and with, you know, the directors of education and their teams is something that is quite important and is very concrete, very, very specific. And it, you know, I remember when I was Minister of Education, I met with a group of principals who had gone through that type of training, and they spoke with me honestly. They said, you know, they didn't realize that some of their behaviors was causing, you know, some students to not do as well or causing harm to those students. It wasn't their intention, but there are things like unconscious biases that are addressed in the training, and that was something that was surfaced. And so, you know, this is a system-wide approach that has been done, but it's not just one time. We have to do these things on a continuous basis so that we improve the quality of education for all students.
Absolutely, but in terms of on a board-to-board basis, as you mentioned, Ms. Linda, before we went to the break, we were talking about the fact that you said the Peel, for example, was really right now in utter turmoil, is reluctant to try to even start or to attempt to implement these measures. So don't we see something here, do we, right? See the need, as you were suggesting before, for the ministers to take a more direct and a hands-on approach in terms of really implementing these policies so that it can trickle down to the schools, really forcing, rather, for lack of a better word, the school boards to make an honest effort in implementing the recommendations.
So I would actually suggest that there's work that has to be done board by board for sure, and there's requirements that we should have of our school board employees, the officials at the school board, that there's things that they need to do, for instance, the training and such. But the problem is so much deeper. We know that the equity classes that teachers, principals receive when they're in their teachers' college save the equity work until the very end of their degree. I used to teach those courses. Those courses aren't taught prior to when they go in and do the practicum, which means they don't actually practice developing the tools that they would need to address equity in the schools. And a lot of students in teachers' education ask for that to happen sooner. That would be a switch that would actually change the culture of educators that come through, and as a consequence, change the culture of principals, so that we're not coming at the problem after so many kids have been harmed.
Yes.
I also think that there has to be stronger language in the Education Act that don't focus on diversity and inclusion, but focus on anti-racism, anti-oppression, because that is very different. Even as an educator myself, having taught equity classes, taught anti-racism classes, when we talk about diversity, it's just different people being in the room and treating them with respect, which is all important. Yes. But anti-oppression means addressing, finding ways to address when a child is called the N-word in class. Right now, there's nothing that seems to be stopping kids from using that word in their schools. There doesn't seem to be pressure for principals to make sure that gets addressed.
Yeah.
I get calls from family members who say they've tried to raise this with principals and principals haven't bothered to call them back. And in my opinion, when you've got a system that is that flawed, it's up to the Minister of Education to take their power and their privilege and make changes that would ensure that that accountability happens in our schools and across our boards.
So then there's also a current call to have.
Can I just
go ahead?
Can,
Go
can
ahead,
I
Ms. Hunter.
can
Go
I
ahead.
just sorry? I want to just jump in a little bit.
Go ahead. Go right ahead.
To give an example, when I was Minister of Education, there were situations in school boards where I had to step in and have a review done of that board.
Yes.
It's important, and the minister has that power and authority really once a report is provided to him to take action. So the report that has been tabled is one that has to be addressed. And if the school board is not capable of addressing that report, it doesn't mean that we just leave all the problems. We actually have to take steps to solve those problems. So when I was minister and I received the report from the York Region District School Board, I provided 22 directives and ordered the board to fulfill those directives within a certain period of time and took steps to implement support so that the board could address the systemic concerns that were raised in the report and that students are at the focus of that decision making and that they need to benefit from all the decisions that are being made in the schools. And so the minister has tremendous power available to him to take action on what he has now received by way of the report on Peel.
So let me ask Ms. Lindo and Ms. Hunter. So are you saying that it's a direct reluctance of the minister to act in his authority? Is that what I'm hearing?
So I think the bigger challenge is that the directives have not solved the problems. Not in York Region District School Board, for instance, there was action that happened after the directives were put into place. However, now we're receiving more reports from families that the exact same problems that forced those original directives to come into place are now happening again. And now when we look at Peel, it's the same thing. So we followed the exact same process to have a report done, to have the minister provide directives. We've done all of that, but the problem hasn't been addressed at its root. And I think frustrating for families. And so my question to the ministers of education would be, how are those directives changing the culture in school so that we do have teachers that are coming in with the skills that they need to address racism on a regular basis? What are we changing in curriculum to ensure that the changes aren't just because of directives in one moment in time, but are changing the nature of how kids are educated here so that we don't have the problem creep up after a couple of years time and time again?
So what say you, Ms. Hunter? Is it a direct indication that the minister is just reluctant to act in his authority?
So I mean, the buck stops with the minister. Yes. The minister has the power now that the Arlene Huggins report is in his hands. He has the power to sit with his ministry. He has, several hundred people who work for him to come up with a plan to help this board. Because if the board itself is not capable of addressing the concerns, we cannot let students suffer. And so, with the aid of the expert resources within the Ministry of Education, such as the Education Equity Secretariat, which I know people like Patrick Case are tremendously capable of addressing issues of anti-Black racism and systemic racism, and to put specific measures in place to correct the problem. And so we cannot let this sit. The powers are available to the minister himself as well as the ministry more broadly to support this board in turning things around.
Okay, so follow up to that then. So now it's in the hands of the ministers to assist the board. So, but in terms of students, student life, Ms. Linda, you mentioned earlier that the way in which even equity, and I did equity when I was in high school 4 years ago, and the languaging, I must say, in my experience, the languaging was quite calm, let's say calm, in terms of how we discuss the use of the N-word, we discuss slavery, we discuss oppression. So do you think that anti-racism courses or courses of that, equity courses, should be a mandatory fixture in high school education or even among the K-12 range and going into universities and colleges?
Oh, I truly, truly do. I think that we have to start talking about racial justice as soon as a child enters into the system. A lot of people believe that those conversations are too difficult to have, and that's one of the excuses for why it's not found itself in the curriculum in the younger years.
Yeah.
But what has also happened in the later years, and once you're in high school, is that you only speak about that in, let's say, a civics course, which means unless you've traveled through all of these experiences in our school system, you don't even see yourself reflected in a real way. There are amazing resources that are available to start to talk about race and racism and the true history of Ontario and Canada that center the voices of Indigenous people, that talk about their experiences of the age of the listener and the learner. And I think that we have to stop shying away from that. The more we shy away from that, the longer these problems will continue, and the more episodes like this that we'll have to have in the future, talking about, why are we here again?
Okay, so let us take a shift here because we're really.
So can I also address that as well?
Ahead,
because
Ms. Hunter.
it is, I believe that it is very important that the curriculum is reflective of Black history, and the fact is that Black history is Canada's history, and this is something that is important. And in addition to that, to really confront issues like systemic racism, anti-Black racism, and other forms of discrimination. There's Islamophobia, there's xenophobia. There are all these concerns that need to be dealt with if we're going to be providing an inclusive form of education in Ontario. But right now, the focus is on Black Lives Matters and the fact that this is a concern that is sweeping our world, and students definitely need to be taught this in school and need to understand the role that Black people have played in the formation of this country, certainly since its inception, before its inception, and currently and in the future. So this is something that is important. It builds, we know that when students see themselves being taught in the curriculum, it builds confidence, it builds engagement.
Yes,
and so it's one of those tools, and as Laura May has said, there are great resources out there, but making it mandatory makes that resources available to Black students as well as non-Black students.
Okay. And that is brilliant. So let us change gears a bit. We're getting into the economics of things now. First hot button issue, defunding the police. What does that look like? What does that mean? How do we go about doing it? Ms. Hunter, you are currently the critic with the Liberal government, Liberal Party and your team for Treasury and Finance. How do we go about undertaking something like that for the Ontario Provincial Police and recommendations to the municipalities in terms of undergoing something like that? But first, do you believe we should start by defunding the police?
I believe that, first of all, that sounds like a great headline, but we have to have practical solutions as well. And, I represent a riding where, I've been advocating for ending gun violence.
Yes.
I've sat in rooms with people, with families that have lost very young people, and students and parents who are saying, is my community safe?
Yes.
And so the role of police services to provide an environment of safety is important. But at the same time, if you have people who have mental health issues, who aren't feeling safe to call for help, or their family members, because there is lack of training, lack of a proper place to get those resources and those supports, I think that's something that we absolutely do need to look at. And there's only so many dollars and funding envelopes that we have, so we have to prioritize. And I would like to see, I have a private member's bill making gun violence a public health issue. I would like to see those types of services, those preventative programs funded. I don't want, municipalities, for instance, to say, no, we can't do those preventative programs because all of our resources are, stuck in policing our
Yes.
communities. No
Absolutely.
one wants to see that.
Yes.
We have to make decisions based on the needs of the community, the priority in the community. And I do believe that we need to put a stronger emphasis on mental health and well-being, and on, ending things like gun violence and making that a public health concern.
And I think what we need to also make clear is that defunding the police, in that essence, is not taking away all the money we give them, or they get from the various government levels, but taking some of that money and investing it somewhere else. And Dr. Linda, you at the beginning of the question, you started nodding. Mm-hmm. Explain for us. How do you first believe it should happen, and how do we do it or undergo something like this?
So my office has been flooded with emails either requesting two big things. One is the defund the police. The second is declaring anti-Black racism a public health crisis so that resources can go to address the crisis.
Directly.
In both instances, yes. And in both instances, explanations about what defunding means and also what it would mean to declare it a public health crisis have been explained. And it's literally redistribution of funds. Part of what has happened in the number of solidarity marches and rallies, part of what we're seeing is a cry from Black community members telling the world that when they call for help, they should not end up dead. When they call for help, they should be able to know that the systems that their taxpayer money are going into are there to protect them too. They deserve to feel safe. But knowing, as Mitzi had said as well, there are a finite amount of money that we have to work with. What they are asking for is a rethink on what we invest in, a commitment from all of us to invest proactively the things that would end up in having more people confronted by the police. So, for instance, making sure that we provide culturally responsive mental health services, making sure that we invest in affordable housing, investing in education, making sure that we invest in quality health care, and employment equity options. And so I think that the public has been extremely clear on what it is that they mean when they say defund. And when you're looking at budgets and one side is ballooning while the others, I have community organizations that provide mental health supports to Black communities that don't even get funding from the provincial government. We need to make sure that they have adequate full funding so that they're not having to work project to project and not able to provide those supports. And then when somebody does have a mental health break, they wouldn't have to call the police. They would be able to call on the supports that actually are there and dedicated to providing them with what they need.
Absolutely. But Ms. Lindo, a follow-up question to that though. Someone who is in distress, a mental health distress, and calls the police and ends up dying, is that an indication as to funding, or is that something else? Because calling the police, who is equipped with resources to handle a situation like that, shouldn't necessarily end in someone dying. So that to me is indicative of something else rather than funding.
I think it's indicative of a number of things. I think on the one hand, we've already spoken about the need for policing and police to receive training to address what their calls look like today. And so what we're seeing is that because of a long history of defunding mental health resources, especially community mental health resources, there are more mental health calls to the police right now. But that's not what policing was set up to do. And so while you try and sort of put a Band-Aid by saying, okay, we're going to make sure they have mental health training or we're going to connect them with mental health teams, we're not recognizing that what is at root of that is the defunding and the lack of stable support for mental health in our communities. And so it does, at the end of the day, it often does come down to look, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, where were the first cuts that were made in provincial budgets when we were trying to reposition what we valued in those days? And what I'm hearing from the community is that a lot of community organizations and mental health services were losing their budgets at that time, and now we're seeing the effects of that.
So it's clear. Go ahead, Ms. Hunter. Go ahead.
Sorry, I just wanted to say that, we have to look at the whole person. We can't just look at, one side of things and, there's a distress call and therefore it's only this type of resource that's needed. And, there's a lot of evidence that actually shows that when you provide people with the right types of support, you have less of those types of tragic incidences that occur. Because if people are getting, mental health support, they have adequate housing, they have, resources for food and to care for themselves and their families, really a universal basic income, which was something that under our former Liberal government that we had put a pilot program in place to have the evidence to make this a bit more broadly available to society here in Ontario. And we even see in what's happening with the COVID-19 response with the CERB and other types of benefits that, people just need to have adequacy and what they need when they need it. And you do find that you will have less calls to police when people have the supports that they need as a whole person.
Okay, so Ms. Linda, you said it's obvious that you're pointing in the direction of favorability towards reallocating those funds. Let's go with that term, reallocating those funds. So when we look at the budgets, Toronto Police, over $1 billion, Ottawa Police, over $300 million, Peel Police, over $400 million allocation. So what percentage are we talking about in terms of taking away and reinvesting in our communities?
So my understanding is that so a lot of this conversation is coming up fairly new, so we're getting new data that we're looking at. What I'm being told on the ground is that different police services are receiving different amounts of money, and so that's part of why what you're also hearing are different amounts to be reallocated, depending if you're in Toronto, if you're in, like I'm calling in from Kitchener. In my area, the call from the African, Caribbean and Black network, ACB network here, has asked for 29.5 million from the police budget and allocated to culturally responsive programming in community, which is supposed to be the starting point to do the preventative work. But that's what I'm hearing here based on the numbers that are here. And I think that what is most important is that what does bring together all of the different advocacy that you're seeing across the province is that everybody knows that we've got to do preventative work. Everybody knows that you can't rely on policing as an entity to address mental health concerns or affordable housing concerns. That's not going to work as a strategy. And so while we're having these discussions at a time where we're navigating a pandemic and we're having to already rethink what budgets look like, why not make sure that we evaluate where we are investing and invest right from now? And so I think that point is also really seriously, because there's an opportunity here to actually make this real. And I think that's why we're seeing so much advocacy saying that it's time to reallocate some of that money right now.
Absolutely. So let's take the turn here and go into economics. In terms of, so what is that, like 2 months ago, or so a couple weeks ago, I should say, about 2 weeks ago, the Premier announced that he'll be investing some 1.5 million into the Black community in terms of development and all that stuff. Ms. Hunter, Ms. Lindo, that was blasted by yourself as being blatantly insufficient, and then the comparison was made. Why does horse racing get 10 million and the Black community, which is an entire subsection of the Canadian population, the Ontarian population, gets 1.5 million? What's the enough? Why is 1.5 not enough? And give us those policy directives. I want you to give me, from a policy perspective, how much is needed to help the Black community to grow. Ms. Hunter, take us away with that one.
Yeah, no, it's almost an insulting response to the issue of anti-Black racism and Black Lives Matter in this moment, when we're obviously as a community hurting because of the horrific situation that happened with the very public filmed killing of George Floyd, the tragic death of Regis Korchinski-Paquette, and so many other names. And we're saying that enough is enough, that a change has to happen in this moment. And in fact, when we look at the social determinants of health and we look at the measurements that underpin that, we know that the Black population in Ontario, all of its 627,000 people, need investments in key areas. Yeah. And I asked the Premier, in fact, where is the $45 million commitment that was made to the Black Youth Action Plan? Why aren't we hearing an update on that? What about the $5 billion a year for the Anti-Racism Directorate? Why is it underspent cumulatively by over $2 million since the Premier has been in office? Because the programs, the consultations have stopped. The annual summit of stakeholders affected by anti-Black racism is not happening. And there's no priority being placed on the ARD. In fact, it's now under the Solicitor General, who is responsible for prisons and police. That's a slap in the face to the Black community. And so to come out, very hastily after, the Premier denied that by saying that we don't have deep-rooted racism in Ontario and Canada as there is in the United States, and completely denying a history here, and then turning that around the next day and trying to do a very fast announcement. People see through that, and that is not enough to address the issue. Certainly, if you read the long-standing report by Dr. Alvin Curling and Roy McMurtry on the roots of youth violence, we know that our young Black people need more investment in their communities across the board, in every community.
So essentially, you're pointing to another whitewashing of our financial investment needs. That's what's happening.
Yes.
Okay. So give me a figure, 500 million. Will that be enough?
So I think before we decide on a figure, I think that part of what we have to do is think very seriously about whether or not any of the money that they do invest at this point, they're actually paying attention to the impact of that investment. So I want to go back to where Mitzi actually started, that $47 million for the Black Youth Action Plan that is sitting with the Minister of Children, it's MCCSS. I always get the letters all confused. But it's sitting with Minister Smith right now.
Yeah.
There were 70 organizations when that plan was first announced under Michael Coteau. There were 70 organizations in select areas in Ontario that had access to the first part, like the piloting of that program. Since the Ford government has come into place, they have not actually expanded that initial 70, and they've not provided any reporting back on what the impact of the spend was. So from the people that I've spoken to who did receive any portion of that money, they weren't even required to have a standardized reporting back system that would allow the government to then say, okay, Black youth are impacted in this way by, an underfunding of homework clubs or mentorship programs, because none of us even know who's receiving part of that funding. My big concern for the $47 million is that the government will do what they are now doing with the Anti-Racism Directorate, and they will say it's been underused, so we can reallocate that money somewhere else. Instead of saying, here is what we have found because we have invested in Black youth. With the Anti-Racism Directorate, they have currently it's just under $5 million that they have in the directorate. There's only $1,000 that can go from the directorate into community. If there's only $1,000 that can be used in community to provide support to Black people across Ontario, that is horribly underfunded.
That's
so
just water for the football games and the basketball tournaments.
This is it. And so I think before we ask them to put any money anywhere, there has to be a commitment to making sure that we're addressing real issues, that we actually ask them to even account for what they have so far before they start cutting. Because at the end of the day, they seem to be inclined to throw money at a problem that doesn't even address it. Even the $1.5 million that they have announced, on one hand, they said it was for the Black community, but then they introduced the person that would be overseeing it, who is hosting an equity table with youth, not just Black youth. So I'm not even sure that the $1.5 million was earmarked specifically for Black communities. And it's that lack of transparency that makes me a little bit worried that the government will say that they're putting money in and investing it in our communities, but really be using it for something totally different. That on its own is extremely dangerous.
Okay, absolutely. And with that, I will just take a very short break here on the Alternative Show. I'll have to pay those bills, but we'll be right back with so much more in this insightful and very solution-driven discussion here with members of Parliament, Dr. Laura May Lindo and Mitzi Hunter. We'll be right back after these messages.
As the world fights this coronavirus, we are standing together as a family.
My name is Kelly. I'm a fan of GBKF.
My name is Pastor Clement Omozane.
I'm Medea, your red carpet host.
I am your host, Ellen Roxon, for the show Talk That Talk here on GBKN FM.
I'm a mother and a teacher. I stand with everyone at this time.
And my name is OJ Ebobo, co-host of the King's Domain.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Owodi, the host of the Chat Up Show on GBKM.
My name is Kenny Bazwai, President and CEO, GBKM FM and TV. We stand with all the community affected by this pandemic.
As the world fights this coronavirus, we are standing together as a family.
My name is Kelly. I'm a fan of GBKF.
My name is Pastor Clement Omozane.
Absolutely, and welcome back to the Alternative Show right here on GBKM FM. If you're just joining us, of course, on our panel for today, we're discussing really policing anti-Black racism for future generations in terms of creating those policies that will get us a step closer towards an equitable world. And of course, I'm joined in studios virtually by members of Parliament, Dr. Lindo and Ms. Hunter, NDP aforementioned, and Liberal recent. So we're just talking about the economics of things. You said you can't give us a definite number as to what that will cost in terms of an economic investment into the Black community to bring us up to par with the rest of our communities. But let us take another spin here and get into our health, because health is where I think, and a lot of the political scientists and strategists and theorists calls it the health racism. Health racism, because blacks are predominantly and historically underserved in our health industry, and we've seen that being highlighted with COVID-19. Ms. Linda, we ended with you, so we're going to go back to Ms. Hunter. Ms. Hunter, but in terms of really creating policies, how do we address this health racism that exists?
It's actually something that I've been calling out because of the COVID-19 pandemic, where, we all sort of got this exposure to the virus equally. Yeah. Yet when you look at the numbers, and I know we're struggling right now because, unfortunately the provincial, medical officer of health and Premier Ford has not, and the health minister have not mandated the collection of race-based disaggregated data as part of the tracking with COVID-19. And that's unfortunate because unlike the United States, where there's clear data that exists that shows higher numbers for African Americans that have tested positive and who have died of the virus than in the general population, here in Canada, in Ontario, we don't have that robust data. But we know that in areas that have high concentrations of Black people, like where I represent, in fact, in Scarborough, there are higher incidences of the virus occurring, so it's circulating more in that community. And in fact, in occupations that were not able to work from home or easily, or that were deemed as essential, were mainly Black and people of color who were continuing to do the brave work of keeping our hospitals, healthcare, long-term care, grocery stores, transit systems working, and while everyone stayed home. Yes. And so when you look at that disproportionate impact, what has to happen is, what is the response? What are we doing to support people in communities and in areas where they need more support and more assistance so that they're not being affected by the virus? If you look at all the healthcare workers, the PSWs, who have fallen victim to this virus and have died, and you look at the faces of those individuals, most of them are Black and brown faces and people of color, and it's happening right in front of us. Whether we address it or not, it is happening. And I believe that now is the time to have that change where we look at the social determinants of health, such as education and health, and make sure that we correct those imbalances.
Absolutely. Ms. Linda, I'm just going to give you 30 seconds here for your rebuttal because we're really coming up on that time. Take it away for us.
No worries. One of the standards for our healthcare system across Ontario is actually equity. I think it's really important that we recognize that the answers are already there when it comes to healthcare. The question is, do we have a Minister of Health who is willing and ready to put their foot down and ensure that we actually have health equity here? Along the same lines of who our frontline workers are, getting data to make sure that we're aware of who is on the front lines is extremely important. Protecting the data so it doesn't get, sold over to other purposes, but literally used to ensure that we build an equitable healthcare system here, including mental health, not just physical health, will go a very, very long way.
Wonderful. And Ms. Linda, I'm just going to kick it to you then back to Ms. Hunter. Political participation, that's our last topic. In terms of really getting the Black faces or racialized faces in the legislature. You mentioned that it was the first time in Ontario's history that enough Black persons were elected so as to create a caucus, which is great. But how do we ensure, taking from yourselves, I mean, you both are immaculate examples to young Black girls, even young Black boys, and Black men and Black women to really pursue. It's a hard road, That's for one. It's a hard road to travel, but it's one that's worth it if you're really about service to your people. So how do we get more persons like yourselves in the legislatures and at those important tables of discussions and policy making?
For me, I think that part of it is being able to demonstrate that we can do work for our community in this space. For a long time, when you're watching it happen at Queen's Park, it's like you don't think that your community is being thought of. But one of the blessings of having, being part of a party that has a number of Black members to form this caucus is that we've been able to bring a lens around what happens in the Black community when we try and debate certain legislation, which a lot of people have said to me they've not heard before. And I think that when people realize that to do their community work in this space, they know that that's how we can start to decolonize Queen's Park and decolonize the systems that have oppressed us for quite some time.
Absolutely. Ms. Hunter.
I mean, this is, we have to do a whole segment on this because,
I understand.
First of all, I just want to say to my colleague in Parliament here, provincial Parliament, I am so happy that you are there. Yes, we are on different parties, but when we see each other, we greet each other, we talk, and it's just wonderful. Because for my first 6 years of being elected, I was the only Black woman. So, while I had other Black colleagues, Michael Cotto, Granville Anderson, and there were other people of color there. I'm not saying that I was completely alone, but there is something about being a Black woman and having that intersectionality that you experience in your profession. And so I'm thrilled to have Dr. Jill Andrews and Dr. Laura May Lindo here with me, and of course Kevin Yardigan and others. So how do we boost that? We have to make sure that we recruit candidates and give opportunity for people to run and become elected and hold those seats. There are so few of them. There's only 124 MPPs across Ontario, and we need more of them to be people of color in all parties. I actually think the PCs not having more diversity in their cabinet is a disadvantage to them. They don't have the richness of the experience, really, in their circle decision making all the time, sort of raising issues and bringing solutions forward, and that's unfortunate. So it's important, I believe, that people be given the space to run and to get involved in political parties in between elections. Participate. We all want to see people volunteer and become engaged in our political process. One of the critical roles that I have is democratic renewal and electoral reform, and it is for those reasons of just being able to talk to people about our democracy and how their voice and their involvement is what improves it. So if you're dissatisfied with it, if you don't think it's relevant to your life, then change it, get involved.
Absolutely, I must say that's the reason we had you here today. And politics is fun, guys. Politics is wonderful. Politics is amazing, and it's really about getting change. So I must say a huge shout out to organizations like the Ontario Black Vote, who is a champion for Black representation in the houses. But of course, ladies, I know time is up on us, and I want to say thank you so much for joining me on the panel today. Quite an insightful and productive discussion we've had today. Definitely looking forward to how you represent us in the legislature in terms of bringing some of these solutions that we might have discussed here today in the House. And let's see, by next year, we can have some dramatic change that is being pushed right now, right?
Thank you so much.
Yes,
Absolutely.
yes. This is the time for the change, and let's grab onto this movement and create a better Ontario for everyone. And thanks for having us today.
Absolutely, and thank you all for joining me. We definitely might need to have a part 2 to that, but that's for a different day and a different discussion. And I thank you at home for tuning in with us here today on the U-Turn Show. Of course, thank you to my studio team, my amazing sponsor, AOF Immigration Canada. Guys, don't forget, this is where we aim to inform, uplift, inspire, and just to create that better world where everyone has that equitable, equal opportunity to matriculate to their full potentials. Again, AOF specializes in all your immigration needs, ranging from Quebec Investor Program, student visa, whatever it might be, they have you covered. So give them a call or send them an email for your private and your confidential consultations. Their phone number is 416-629-4617. You can also send them an email. It's at info@aofimmigration.com. You can also visit their offices. That's if you're in Ontario, of course. They're located at 5800 Ambler Drive in Mississauga, Ontario. And guys, thank you so much for joining me. As we always like to say, until next time, 3 to 4, same host, Romain Redmond, on your same station, GBKM FM. Just keep reaching, keep achieving, and keep changing the world. Bye-bye.
As the world fights this coronavirus, we are standing together as a family.
My name is Kelly. I'm a fan of GBKF.
My name is Pastor Clement Omozane.
I'm Medea, your red carpet host.
I am your host, Ellen Roxon, for the show Talk That Talk here on GBKM FM.
I'm a mother and a teacher. I stand with everyone at this time.
And my name is OJ Ebobo, co-host of the King's Domain.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Lloydie, the host of the Chat Up Show on GBKM.
My name is Kenny Bagwai, President and CEO, GBKM FM.
Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you're listening or watching from in the world, of course. Welcome back to the U-Turned Up Show right here on GBKM FM. Of course, I'm your host, Romain Redmond, and if you're just joining us or for the first time on the U-Turned Up Show, of course, welcome to the show. If you're back from last show, of course, welcome back. As you know, the U-Turned Up Show go from 3 until 4 p.m. right here on GBKM FM. And don't forget, this is where we aim to inspire, inform, and also to energize today's youth so that they can tackle the world and help to create a world that they would like and love to, of course, live in. Don't forget our platforms are on Facebook at GBKM TV, on YouTube at GBKM TV. Also get us on our website, www.gbkm.fm. You can also get us on TuneIn app, is GBKM, and get our app from our website and take us with you wherever you go in the world. And of course, the U-Turned Up Show is brought to you by the kind sponsorship of course, AOF Immigration Canada, who specializes in all your immigration needs, ranging from the Quebec Investor Program, permanent residency, student visa, whatever it is, they have you covered. So of course, just give them a call or send them an email for your private and your confidential consultation. Their phone number is 416-629-4617. You can also send them an email, it's info@aofimmigration.com. You can also visit our offices. They're located at 5800 Ambler Drive in the great city of Mississauga. So if you were with us on last week's broadcast, you would have heard the interesting discussion that we have, informative, and of course really paving a way as to how we can dig ourselves out of the hole that has kept us bounded through racism. But of course, today we continue on that same trajectory, but we're bringing you those policies, we're bringing you those solutions to the already established problem. And you definitely don't want to miss that discussion we'll have in studios. Of course, I'll be joined by an amazing panelists who will help me to break down those answers and create those policies for you. And I promise you, you don't want to miss that. But we'll take our very first break right here on the U-Turned Up Show, but we'll be right back with so much more.
As the world fights this coronavirus, we are standing together as a family.
My name is Kelly. I'm a fan of GBKF.
My name is Pastor Clement Omozane.
I'm Medea, your red carpet host.
I am your host, Ellen Roxon, for the show Talk That Talk here on GBKM FM.
I'm a mother and a teacher. I stand with everyone at this time.
And my name is OJ Ebobo, co-host of the King's Domain.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Lloydie, the host of the Chat Up Show on GBKM.
My name is Kenny Bagwai, President and CEO, GBKM FM and TV. We stand with all the community affected by this pandemic.
As the world
And of course, welcome back to the U-Turns of Show right here on GBKM FM. It's me, your host, Romain Redmond, and as I promised before I went on break, that means you haven't missed anything as much as yet. So we promised to bring you that discussion about real solutions to the issue of anti-Black racism in our society. We want to create a world in which all our young people coming behind us, in front of us, where they can live in an equitable society which recognizes their humanity and treats each and every one fairly and justly. And of course, on my panel today is, of course, a member of Parliament for Kitchener, member of Provincial Parliament, that is, for Kitchener Centre, and a critic for anti-racism for the official opposition, and of course, chair for the NDP's Black Caucus, Dr. Laura May Lindo. Also to join us in the hour, we're hoping is MPP for Scarborough Guildwood, Miss Mitzi Hunter. But of course, Miss Lindo, you're here with us first. Of course, welcome to the U-Turned Up Show. We must say, we're having an interesting conversation before we went live. But of course, just to create some foreground, how are you doing personally, though, in light of what's happening outside?
To tell you, it has been a trying time. I'm exhausted, and it is very, very difficult to be having these kinds of conversations, knowing that we have been fighting the same fight against anti-Black racism for so long, but honored to be here to be able to do some of the moving from inside the system.
Absolutely, but the reason for us being here today is one which is disheartening. For one, it's one which is long overdue in the sense that we didn't expect, many of our forefathers didn't expect that in 2020, moving into 2021, we'll still have to be here grappling and having those conversations about racism, if it's right, if it exists, and all that stuff. But we're in the midst of it. We were just a couple weeks ago given that urgent push, I should say, to have our systems change, to have society change. And of course, I'm talking about everything being catapulted with the murder of George Floyd in the US, which has started a ripple reaction across the world. And here in Canada, that conversation is even stronger than ever in terms of, and the sense of urgency to get it fixed. But of course, Ms. Lindo, being the critic for anti-racism and of course cheer for the Black Caucus, I want you to shed some light on what the establishment of the Black Caucus means in terms of policies, in terms of really getting the system fixed, and then give us some insights into the optimism that we've received from this new urgent push. What does that sense of optimism looks like for the future?
So starting with the Black Caucus, I can tell you that it was with great humility that we were formed. We had hosted a roundtable with leaders in the Black community with the NDP, with Andrea Horwath, our leader, and we were asking about ways that we could operate as the NDP, as the official opposition, to better support Black communities. And one of the calls was to form a Black Caucus. So it's the first time in the history of Ontario that enough Black members of provincial parliament have been elected in a single party, which on its own is quite exciting to think about. And our goal has been to shed light on how every policy, every bit of legislation, every sector in government impacts Black communities. Sometimes we think that there's only a handful of areas that we are impacted, but we know on the ground that Black community members have a different experience, for instance, with affordable housing, a different experience with employment equity, a different experience when we're in education and in healthcare. And so our purpose in forming as the Black Caucus has been to speak openly and honestly about that at question period at Queen's Park,